Hi all, there was a very exciting round one of the Sinquefield Cup. This is a 2-week tournament. Some of the top players in the world are playing in it. Magnus Carlsen, Caruana, Nakamura, Topalov, Grischuk, Anand, Giri, Veselin Topalov, Aronian and Wesley So. So a fantastic tournament. Let's have a look at the amazing round one clash between Magnus Carlsen and Veselin Topalov. So if you remember in the previous tournaments, Magnus Carlsen forfeited on time against Topalov. There's a backdrop of that. And let's see what happens here. Magnus was playing white, e4. And Topalov played c5, the Sicilian defense. We have knight f3, d6. So Topalov is really wanting a fight with his choice of opening. It doesn't seem to be an opening designed to go for a draw. Veselin Topalov himself is a former world champion, and in becoming world champion he showed great aggression with both colours and dynamic play. So here it seems he's going into that style of play again. Bishop b5 check. This is a kind of taming move, a choice made to kind of make the game more positional and quieter, so avoiding the cut and thrust of typical Sicilian defence positions from the open Sicilian. So knight d7, it has a more Roy Lopesian feel to it, that white is potentially going to castle and maybe construct the centre later. So we have castling, knight gf6, rook e1, and also of course there's this kind of idea of maybe e5 sometimes that could be useful. A6, and here the bishop actually drops back to d3, which blocks in the pawn. It seems a bit slow to do this. Maybe bishop f1 is also interesting. Okay, so we have b5 stretching out on the queen side, threatening to kick the bishop back, but it also provides b7, a fianchetto here. So white tries to stop this. If he plays actually c3, this still might be useful for black, and later the option to take en passant if white ever does d4. So actually white stops this with c4, and here we get a crazy move which is apparently an improvement over a rapid game Magnus Carlsen had with Nakamura. It's an improvement over a rapid game. Can you believe this? So Veselin Topalov has actually been looking at Magnus Carlsen's rapid games potentially for innovations. This is a position which has seen a few different moves, but this new move now hasn't been really seen before. Incredible. And I think Michael Basman, British IM Michael Basman, would be proud. It's like the move g4 and g5 have been inserted in many different openings in the last few years, and here we see g5. Just from a fundamental point of view, of course it will be ideal for an attacking player to have a rook blasting down the opponent's king, and in principle that's basically what the move is kind of inviting, for white to take this pawn and to get this kind of hack attack going. It's a move which I would like playing, of course, in Blitz. It's a hack attack move, and it's actually more kind of justifiable in this particular position, because in a way white has slowed down his development of his queenside pieces. He's kind of blocked in his queenside pieces, and black does seem to have fast pressure on the diagonal as well, and he's also of course leaving this pawn. But any Benko Gambit player, although you're getting more central pressure and great piece activity here. So this looks like a dangerous position for white. And you might wonder, well, okay, there are certain things white can do here. Take the pawn. Maybe is e5 useful? Is c takes at all useful? Magnus actually took the pawn. Let's just have a quick look at some other alternatives here. What about taking here? Let's have a quick engine check actually. Then it allows g4. The knight's inconvenienced. You notice it actually hasn't got many squares to go. It would have to go to h4. And here it seems black's doing quite nicely after e6, stopping the knight, going to f5, and then black is having this nice knight e5 as well. So, as an example, knight c3, just leaving this knight stranded. Bishop g7. If any g3 at any point, knight e5. This looks really nice for black, because again, you know, knight g2 then is ruled out because of knight f3. And yeah, this is the kind of position which I've definitely seen Michael Basman, when he played over the board with g5 and g4 play, he's often getting strong knights as well as this clamp when the g pawn's used. It's a positional thing here. It's not to rip open lines here, it's positional. A beautiful knight on e5. This sort of position is very active, it seems, for black. You know, if white took here and take here, just imagine this position. It's a very active position for black. And how does white actually get a decent game here? Say d4, we can just take that. And we have this beautiful knight on e5. This sort of position with that knight stranded on h4 is a kind of positional justification for the pawn attack on b5. Basically, this taking on b5 doesn't seem that interesting, although that is actually the top engine choice. One of the top engine choices. Either take this pawn or take this pawn. Let's rule out e5 as well. I think black can just actually take this because there's a loose piece here. Now the bishop is actually not protected by anything. So this position, if white has to protect that, this is also a very interesting position for black. After c takes, white is losing central control, winning this pawn. Move like knight d5, protecting e5, threatening knight f4. It's not great for white, is it? This particular position. Black has great compensation here, it seems, in this kind of position. And you see that, you know, Magnus Carlsen's move, which interrupts development, is kind of being exploited. So yeah, very, very energetic reply. A shock, you know, value to this move. So Magnus takes the pawn with knight takes g5. Okay, so black still gets a strong knight now on e5 with tempo though, hitting d3. And also now there's the idea of rook g8, of course, and where would this knight go? So white's got to be very careful here about h3 and f3 potentially. If he plays a move like bishop c2, for example, then I think black actually gets the advantage after rook g8. And what is white doing here? If here, this is a disaster, bishop g4, total disaster, that pin. This is actually kind of, I think it's actually lost for white here. You can see this is going to be disastrous, this position. So white's got to be very careful about f3 and h3 in this position after rook g8. So after knight e5, Magnus does what seems to be a very sensible choice with the bishop, because his bishop's attacked and his upcoming rook g8. He plays bishop e2, and it seems okay, very sensible to play this. We have b takes c4, and now probably an interesting idea might be to take this opportunity to challenge the knight on e5 with knight f3. This wasn't played, and probably the reason it wasn't played, it does seem as though white's asking to be kind of dislocated after knight d3 takes. This looks like a dislocating pawn, but in fact here it seems white might be okay after e5. This position is not so easy for black to play, even though the pieces seem a bit stuffed here. For example, bishop b3, there's a tactical idea of check. And a very tactical move, knight takes f7. This shows some of the tactical dangers. Check, winning that bishop with advantage. So even though white's pieces are dislocated, this might have been an interesting way of playing the position. Just retreat here on knight f3. Yeah, inviting knight d3. This is an interesting position. It seems awkward for white, but yeah, with e5 here, what is black actually doing? If knight d7, that looks scary for e6. This looks quite scary indeed. So knight f6, queen f3, for example, hitting the rook. And again, there's opportunity for white to get something, even though he seems to be playing without this bishop at the moment. But it's probably the bishop issue which dissuaded Magnus, I imagine, from just not playing knight f3. Instead, we have this other move, knight a3. Knight a3, and yeah, this is a very, very interesting position. Now rook g8. Okay, and you might wonder, right, what is going on here? Magnus played a very, very interesting looking move in this position. If he plays knight f3, so he didn't play this, then again we kind of get this move which interrupts white's piece development. Knight d3, it seems to like dislocate white. And here you might wonder, does that same mechanism, is this mechanism okay? Well, actually here black has queen d5 in this position, threatening mate, and this is actually good for black. It seems this is actually really good for black now, for bishop b7 ideas, etc. Just coordinating on g2, just using that g-file pressure. And yeah, this is a dislocating pawn, so that doesn't seem at all appetizing. If that really is the case here, that knight f3 leads to that sort of position after knight d3, that doesn't seem very appetizing. So this knight d3 does seem like a dislocating idea, and Magnus, yeah, he can't play knight h3, just take that, the pin. So he plays knight takes c4, a piece sacrifice, sacking the knight on g5, and also yeah, so putting pressure on e5, but black doesn't have to take on g5 immediately. If he takes on g5 immediately, this isn't particularly good. This goes straight into Magnus's concept here. We have d4, and now what? Hitting the rook and the knight. So that would be a double attack. Well, not concept. That's just good for white. Basically, this position. Knight takes c4, bishop takes g5, and then what? Black is in trouble again. If he moves the knight, I think he's just going to get smashed through the center here if he's not careful. Takes this position. Looks like trouble for black. Very complicated stuff, but it looks a bit awkward for black here. And Magnus would have 6 pawns against 4. So that's interesting. But Topalov plays the best way of taking on g5. He takes, after a delay, he plays actually first knight takes c4. This seems to be the strongest way of doing this. Knight takes c4. Okay, so now if bishop takes c4, then just rook takes g5, and there's nothing really worrying black here at all. He's just a piece up. So the idea after knight takes c4 is now to protect the knight actually. So d4. So in fact, the c4 knight has been in effect sacrificed for white, trying to blast, it seems, black through the centre with the king still here. Very exciting stuff for round 1. So this knight's hanging here on c4 at the moment. How to handle that? A move like d5, I think this is just going to get absolutely blasted. With e5, just ignore that d5 pawn, just go e5, and then black does seem to be getting completely stuffed after e6. This looks extremely bad. Yeah, for example, like that, it's pretty bad. So basically, yeah, black's got to be extremely careful. Knight a5 might be plausible. We actually played knight b6. This is more plausible. Now we still have this pressure through the centre, and also that f7, and this diagonal looks a bit precarious. I think this actually plays bishop h5 here. Another alternative might be, this seems technically best, might be d takes, taking, but it's simplifying. And it seems, this position, sorry, not there, maybe better knight g5 or knight a6, knight h6. This position here is not really what white wants. Simplification with black having a bit more material. So yeah, Magnus keeps things tense. So he plays this bishop h5, hitting f7. That's taken. And now, maybe rook g6 is technically the best way of defending f7. But actually rook g7 was played. With rook g6 and h6 to follow, this is something like h6 to follow. This is dangerous. Knight takes here. Black has things like bishop g4. Or just bishop g7, and that's very comfortable with bishop g4 to follow. This is strong for black. So, but he actually vacated that g7 square in defending here. Maybe this is a small inaccuracy from black. Knight takes h7. Complicated position, very complicated. And we have now the move queen d7, which looks to have ideas like queen h3 exploiting that pin on the g2 pawn, or queen g4 just trying to get the queens off, hitting g2. Again here, okay, it seems, from a technical point of view, the position might actually be roughly balanced at this point. We see d takes c5, but it's so complicated. D takes c5. e5, this might be a slight mistake. You see that Magnus has got all his pieces developed, no hemmed in bishop, no dislocation, and it does seem very scary to play e5 and e6, but this might be a bit counterintuitive. Knight takes f8. This instead, knight takes f8 might have been a little bit better here. This kind of forces black to play something like queen h3, because if he takes, then there's a mate in 3, check here, and then mate. So knight takes f8 does seem to have something going for it. After queen h3, this seems to be as though it's balanced here. Bishop takes g3, and this position is just very interesting. Not taking here because of bishop h6, but rook c8, and it's a balanced position dynamically. Incredible position. Where, okay, what to do about this knight on f8? It's crazy. So stopping rook h6 finally. Then say this happens. It's just very, very interesting stuff. After knight takes f8, so black has to be extremely careful. Say knight c4, The idea of e5. It gets very complicated. But anyway, knight takes f8 in a nutshell here is interesting to consider. The ramifications of knight takes f8. e5 was played, and now it seems Topalov's really gaining an important resource here. Based on g2 and the g file, he just threatens immediately a mate in 1, queen c6, threatening a mate in 1. But it also means that this queen g6 becomes possible. So white has to deal with the mate in 1. If he plays, say, nope, not there. What other way of dealing with the mate in 1? Doesn't seem to be too many ways of dealing with this. If he plays like g3, that's suicidal, I think. Just bishop b7. So he has to deal with it. He plays the move f3. And then we have queen g6. Again, threatening mate 1, also for the queens to come off. And now we have knight f6. This seems to be very scary with that rook there. It can't really be taken. Can it? Or can it? Takes. This might actually be just to equal this position. Incredibly. Bishop e6. Takes. Queening. Crazy stuff. And apparently this might actually be technically a dynamic equality. But anyway, no, instead of indulging in that, just king d8 was played. So essentially, black is material up here. He's like a piece up, with the queens basically coming off. That's not a good sign. The queen's coming off. If white throws in a check here, I don't think it really helps the situation. Just knight d7, and we still have this g2 issue. So yeah, Magnus is forced to kind of take the queens off, and now he's basically playing a piece down. So a huge success for g5. The Grob delayed. Michael Besman's the Grob system with g5 or g4. Very aggressive idea if white's castled. Wow. That's black is now a piece up. So bishop b7 was played here. Another dynamic move. If knight takes c5, then we have bishop takes f3. That's unpleasant here for white. g3, rook c8 starts to get unpleasant. So instead we have move h4. Rook c8 protecting c5. h5, as though this h-pawn might be some sort of trump card. Bishop d2. Knight c4 hitting the bishop. The bishop goes there. Bishop h6 occupying that kind of weakness of the last move. This diagonal looks tempting. Now using e3 square potentially. Check. We have rook d3 protecting e3. Bishop f4. Looking at knight takes e5 now. Knight f2 protecting e5. But black is kind of a piece up. Bishop c6 protecting key squares here. Knight h3 asking the bishop to go somewhere. Bishop g3. The rook moves now. And now bishop b5. Yes, it's very useful, that bishop c6, for things like this as well. So threatening knight takes b2 here, winning some material. White gets out of that skewer line. Bishop c6. Yeah, black's just basically a piece up. Knight f2. Dropping e5 here. It seems. Because after knight f2 in this position, the tactical bishop takes e5 is played. You might think, wasn't that defended by white? Well, Magnus plays knight g4 here. If he does take here, then there's bishop takes f3. Nasty stuff skewering here. And say this, rook takes g2, and say this. This is better for black. Rook g5. And not only can black win the exchange, but also there's other stuff like taking now available. So that's not very nice for white at all. So yeah, after bishop takes e5, instead of trying to punish black for that, just knight g4 was played. But now Topalov takes on c3. He's simplifying again. White is now threatening knight f6 check. That's parried with king f8. King f2. We have rook h8 looking at that pawn. That's ignored with knight e5. Counter-attacking. Knight takes e5. Rook takes, protecting the pawn. But yeah, black is a bishop up here for a pawn after all the complications have cleared away. Bishop e8 protecting c5. g4. f6. These are not allowed to become connected and advance too far. Rook e6. Bishop b5. And yeah, black's just a piece up. Doubling, but rook c7. And now, yeah, we've reached time control, extra time, move 40. So yeah, no one's forfeited on time here in this game. But yeah, it's clear that black is basically a piece up, and Magnus Carlsen resigned here. Yes, unfortunately, he's lost his last two games against Topalov, but Topalov really won it. Took a fight to Magnus in this game with the black pieces. Incredible fighting stuff. G5. And incredibly, there was another G5 in another game in round 1. They were all fighting games in round 1. So it'd be nice to check them out if we have time on this channel and in other rounds. It's a very, very exciting tournament. I thought I'd kick off coverage with this game. Very interesting stuff indeed. Hope you got something out of it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.